Why tracking your body is making you less honest. This is an interesting topic for so many of us, including me. I have the Oura Ring right here. So if you need your HRV to tell you whether you're allowed to speak, to work out, if you need to sleep for longer in the bed, only using these things like HRV to do that, you're already lying to yourself to some degree. Not to other people, but to yourself. And so most people using wearables today aren't necessarily dysregulated. They're just undecided about actually who's in charge. And in this episode, I'm going to show you how tracking your body when used in the wrong order actually quietly trains your silence and actually understanding intuition. A good example of this, there was a friend of mine that was working with a client of theirs. The client came in the morning. My friend asked them, well, how are they doing? And he said, let me check my sleep tracker. Let me see how my sleep score was, right? So there was no actual answer to the question. It was going directly to the wearable information to say how this person was feeling that day. So in this episode, I'm not going to tell you to stop tracking things. That's not what we're going to be doing here. I certainly think that it'd be very, very helpful. I'm going to show you where tracking belongs and where it might not all the time. We're going to walk through how measurement tools quietly replace decision-making. That's the big piece here. Why that conditions the nervous system to delay truth, meaning that you don't have that capacity anymore. This is like, your friend's phone numbers that you used to know as a kid. You don't have any of that anymore, right? Because something has taken its place. That's not necessarily always a bad thing, but it can get out of control. And how people end up calm, articulate, and actually unable to say no when they're tracking too many things. And that's interesting, right? So I'll explain what actually happens biologically without therapy language, without motivational talks, and without hacks here. And at the end, I'm going to give you a simple map to put metrics back downstream of choice, meaning you're going to use metrics for sure, but understand that there has to be a sensation. There has to be the capacity to observe what's happening in the body intuitively, at least using the tracking information for a certain period of time, and then taking off it for a little while can be very freeing and very widening to your capacity. So we'll talk about that too. So if you use wearables, nervous system tools, or recovery practices and feel hesitant, over-explanatory, or unclear when it matters, this is an episode for you. Meaning, listen up, because everybody in the world of tracking and wearables gets very excited about what's going on here, as do I. But if you just use this information, you lose something, and you lose something big. And I'm seeing this in clinical practice all the time. So first, I'm going to show you the exact moment people hand over their authority to data. Usually without realizing it. Then we'll look at this as, this is not, lack of awareness per se, but it's inhibition caused by a sequencing error. And then we'll talk about that sequencing here in a minute. And then finally, I'm going to give you a set of constraints, not tips, that retrain your authorship without turning this into wellness advice. This isn't about being calmer. It's about being clearer and letting your physiology adapt after the fact, after giving yourself a little bit more intuition as to what's going on. Okay, so here's a scenario for you. You wake up. What's the first thing you do in the morning? You check your numbers. You look at your HRV. You look at your sleep score. You look at your recovery score. How does it make you feel if those numbers aren't very good? Are you going to have a bad day? What if you wake up feeling okay, but then all of a sudden you check all those scores and they look terrible? Now does your day get ruined? There's actually a new term for this. And we have certain ones. One's called orthorexia, which is the fear of eating anything bad for you. There's another one called orthosomnia, which is the fear of having a bad night's sleep, related to those sleep trackers that you have on your hands, and I do too. So are you going to be okay if some of those numbers aren't good? But what if you actually feel okay despite those numbers? Well, what do you do about that, right? And so this is what we call authority confusion. At some point you learned if you can't measure it, you shouldn't trust it. This sounds reasonable, it sounds scientific, but functionally it's self-deception disguised as objectivity. Because again, look, we want objective data. There's no doubt about it. But what can happen is that we deceive ourselves that this is the data that's true. This is how it's going to be because the data is showing a certain thing. This is called outsourced authorship, okay? And so what's happening here is that your nervous system isn't dysregulated. It's not frozen. It's not overwhelmed. It's not unsafe. It's just conditioned to delay action until you give it this external signal for permission. And that's when your voice, your capacity to know and to not deceive yourself gets a little shaky, gets a little iffy, not because the truth isn't there. is because you've undecided about who gets to decide, right? Is it your ring that's decide? Is it your whoop that gets to decide? Or who's getting to decide all of this, right? So remember, so this is kind of an interesting point here, and it's important. Wearables are measurement tools. They are not decision tools. They give you information, then you get to decide what to do with it, okay? When metrics move upstream of choice, the nervous system, your nervous system learns observation is safer than commitment, meaning you're basically outsourcing this authorship again, right? So you're not giving yourself any more credit. You're just saying, well, these are the metrics and that's what I'm going to do, right? And this is how people become this is how people can become insightful, regulated, articulate, and consistently silent. So it sounds like you know what's going on, but you don't really know what's going on because you're not intuitively understanding what's happening. So there are really 3 steps that never change. First, a sensation. This is what the body registered. Second, a decision, what you choose to do with that signal. So, and then 3 is the expression, what moves outward into the world, right? So then sensation doesn't have to mean anything, right? You hit your toe, it causes pain. You might think, oh, now this toe is never going to be the same. I'm never going to walk again. How am I going to take care of my children or whatever? Like we can go through these like sort of rounds of things, but none of it has to be true. So we can train this over time using things like meditation to be able to separate the sensation from the decision, right? So that's important here. But really in the end, you have sensation, you have decision, and you have expression. So what wearables do, what trackers do, is really collapse step 2, which is the decision point itself. They replace the decision, the intuitive aspect things, with an interpretation. So instead of, this feels wrong, I'm not doing it. Instead, you say, my HRV is low. Maybe I shouldn't do this right now, right? So that's not wisdom, really. That's abdication, especially if it's not aligned with the sensation aspect of things and how you feel, right? Because that's really what is important. Now, I totally get it. In the beginning, when you're wearing wearables and using them, sometimes they're a great way to kind of tune in to what that decision might be best to do, okay? I 100% agree with that. But what can happen is that we get too reliant on this. Once we start training ourselves to understand, okay, when I wake up with a poor HRV, these are typically the things that happen during the day. That's true, but it doesn't always happen that way, right? And you find ways to help mitigate that as well. The more you wear wearables, and the more you see how you can change biometric data by just using it over time, and then stopping it and understanding the intuition of it all, right? So the core mistake here is that people are using data to answer questions that really data cannot really answer directly, which is, should I say no? Do I want this? Am I crossing my own boundary? Then they're trying to fix the wrong thing, like better sleep, better readiness, more regulation. Meanwhile, the real issue remains untouched, which is they're avoiding this authorship, this taking ownership of what's going on. Now, again, I think all of this is in the context, right? Which is that sometimes wearables can be very, very helpful for all this. But again, what happens is, like everything we do, is we can take things too far and forget to have any capacity ourselves. So the correct sequence here, which I really think is non-negotiable, is what it comes down to, is that you have to fix the order. Energy before regulation. So low energy is going to increase deference. You really have to optimize your health. This is what I do in clinical practice, optimizing health using a framework called health optimization medicine in practice. You have to have number 2, which is safety before optimization. You don't necessarily need better metrics. You need to tolerate the consequences of being able to vocalize, to speak, to not deceive yourself of what you really, really want and what you really, really need. And this could be because you don't feel safe. And this is something with the nervous system regulation that can be extremely important. And then the third thing is that important here is that you need to have signal before structure, meaning decision first and then data second. So your voice doesn't come from calm, it comes from ownership. And that's what I call the parasympathetic edge, just not relaxation, but a commitment without collapse. The idea here is that we can calm down our nervous system, we can relax, we can sort of tune in to these aspects of our biology. Now, this is not easy for everybody. It can take time, it can take effort, it can take training, but it's definitely possible. And you can use tools, as I mentioned, to help you here, like wearables, breath work, somatic practices, even psychedelic frameworks. None of them, they don't generate truth directly. What they amplify is what you're already willing to stand behind. And used correctly, metrics identify patterns after decisions, practices support recovery after expression, tools follow agency, never replacing it, okay? So if a tool tells you whether you're allowed to speak, it is already being misused. And this is really the important part here, is that I use all of these things in practice: wearables, breathwork, somatic practices, psychedelic frameworks. But we have to have a foundation to all of this from an energetic perspective. And that's optimizing vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and cofactors. That's going to help it so that you have enough energy, you have enough capacity to be able to take authorship, to take ownership of your decisions, and not just outsource them to wearables over time. Okay. They can be used initially, but what I'm talking about here is outsourcing over time, which gets to be challenging and gets people into trouble. So here's what we want to do here. So what are we actually going to do here? So I'm not talking about a lifestyle overhaul. What I'm going to do here is give some constraints, not directly wellness advice here. This is not wellness advice. The first one is to make at least one decision you are currently making with wearable data to not make it with wearable data. Say no, state of preference, end something early, no metrics beforehand. So if you wake up, don't check your HRV. If you exercise, don't check your max heart rate, and just see how you feel. Understand this more than looking at the numbers outsourced. Constraint number 2 is probably the biggest one here, which sensation is information, not permission, meaning your body gives you signals. It does not give approval per se. When sensation appears, say, this is information, not an instruction, then decide anyway, because over time you can train understanding how this is going to go, right? You can learn how to meditate. You can learn how to observe your thoughts. You can learn from previous wearable experience. But in the end, it's not an instruction per se, right? It's understanding the sensation and doing the right thing from what you know. Constraint 3 is to track after expression, meaning you don't have to stop tracking. Just change the orders. Speak first, act second, and then review the data later. Instead, so try to test yourself. See if you can see, there may be a short-term physiologic cost for this, but that's actually an adaptation, not failure. And what you'll find is that you'll get feedback advice here. It's like, okay, this is how I felt. This is what happened. This is what the metrics look like. And then I went back and looked at the data, and then this is what I can do next time and check it again. So this is kind of a cool, sort of ninja trick, which is check the data after you do something, not before, and then see how it went, and then reframe, regenerate a new way of doing something and try a different way, trial and error, and see until you get the scores that you're looking for. Constraint 4 is a really important one just in general, which is called, name your delay phrase, meaning that, try to add this in here so that you actually do it. This is something that I have to do, right? One way you can do this also is actually to talk in the third person to yourself. You can say, Dr. Scott is going to wait 5 seconds before making a decision, or you can say that I need to regulate first. I'll know tomorrow. My body isn't ready. Something like this, where the phrase isn't insight per se. It's just your it's really just creating what's called an avoidance signature. The idea is that you're trying to delay your gratification by looking at your data and being more intuitive of the things that you're trying to track and wear and understand. And then constraint 5 is important, that when you're doing this, when you're coming off wearables and trying to become more intuitive with the things that you do, your HRV may dip, your sleep may fragment a little bit, your appetite may shift a little bit as you're trying to get more of an intuitive sense of how you're doing. And that can be difficult, but it's usually a pretty quick transition for people once they can just put things in the closet, right? Put your ring away for a little while. It's like putting your phone away and understanding that you feel great after not being on your phone, after a little bit of concern and anxiety related to not having it around. And then, I think that in the end here, I want to say that I think that metrics are extremely useful. I use them personally. I use them in clinical practice. But the moment they replace decision-making, they train silence and they train you to not have intuition anymore. And this is where things get really into trouble over time. Yes, you want objective data. That is absolutely true. And I work with this all the time in clinical practice. But you have to have an intuitive sense of how you're feeling. And you can't be relegated to what your wearables say that day. If you wake up in the morning, your HRV is bad, then suddenly you're going to have a bad day. No, that doesn't have to be, right? What if you woke up in the morning, you had a great day, and then at the end of the day, you checked your HRV, and your HRV was crap in the beginning, but you felt great. Does that mean your day was crap because your HRV was crap? No, it doesn't actually. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that you woke up and had a bad HRV that morning for whatever reason, but it didn't affect you. And so it doesn't really matter in the end, right? So certainly you want to look at trends over time and how you feel. These are all things important. As you look at intuition, you combine it with with wearables in tracking. So tell the truth is what it comes down to, and let your physiology catch up. That's not recklessness, okay? That's how systems learn. And we are learning. We are humans and we evolve to learn. And that's what we do very, very well. That's why we are the species that we are. We always want to learn. We always want to change. We always want to improve. We always love our dopamine hits as a result of that, right? That's what dopamine really is for, to give us rewards for things that are new and novel and different ways to do things, right? So when it comes down to it here is that I love to track like everybody else does, okay? But have to bring back intuition into the conversation. And that intuition is something I teach my patients. After maybe tracking for 2 or 3 months, now let's stop the tracking, or let's decrease the tracking. Let's have you track after the fact. I think that's a big one that's very interesting. Doing the after the fact kind of thing. Go the whole day without looking at your numbers. And after the day, check it out, see how things went. And then if you're looking at stress scores, you're looking at, HRV, you're looking at how much in time you spent in zone 4, whatever. Hopefully not too much in zone 3. You get a better sense of truly what's going on. And that's where you make the big shift, where now you can actually leverage data in an intuitive way. That's sort of the next evolution for us, using these biometrics and this data. So we can crunch the numbers, we can look at the best protocols, and we can also understand the intuitive aspect of how you feel, and then bring those two things together. AI can do the former. It cannot do the latter, everybody. So, hey, let's have those conversations. Let's take ourselves off our computer screens and our wearables sometimes and just, say hello, have fun to yourself and to others. Create space. Enjoy. And we'll see you next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this episode, and have a great rest of your day.